Yo, what is up everyone? Back here with another video. Today's video we are going to be going over terastallization and all the different steps and details that go into it. Basically the mechanic itself is a very complex mechanic that can be used in a lot of different ways. So what this is almost like a quick guide on how to use terastallization and the different ways you can utilize it in the competitive format. As well, if you guys enjoyed the content, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment from what you learned today. And if there's anything you think that I missed that you want me to cover, make sure to let me know in the comments what videos you guys would like to see me make next. As always, I incredibly appreciate the support, and let's get right into it. So basically, terastallization to me is a very, very interesting mechanic. Now, the main thing with terastallization, right, is terastallization pretty much functions almost as like it changes your type, right? So the way you can utilize it is almost like so unique from any other way you would utilize any other kind of gimmick, right? I'm actually gonna move this here, so we can have both these up at the same time. X this out, and there we go. So pretty much, right, with terastallization, I'm actually going to move these over here so it's a little bit easier. All right, so anyways, with terastallization, the interesting thing about it, right, is how basically you take advantage of it from a defensive standpoint and from an offensive standpoint, right? So realistically, when you're building out any kind of team, when you're going to be terastallizing, you're doing it with one of three different goals in mind, right? So pretty much you're using a defensive terastallization, you're using an offensive terastallization, or using a counter-offensive terastallization, right? Now, with the defensive terastallization, these are going to be mostly examples where you're pretty much like using it in a way to counter an opponent's play. So let's say that you know that an opposing Dragonite is going to be going for a normal type extreme speed into your Grimmsnarl, right? And you know that they're, obviously going to take advantage of this next to Chen Pao. If you guys don't know, for those of you who are newer to VGC and don't know what this means, Chen Pao is a Pokemon that has an ability which lowers your defense. And what Dragonite does is it pairs with it and uses a move called Extreme Speed, which has high priority, so it almost always goes first, and it turns into a normal type to get extra damage. And that, combined with the defense lowering and Choice Band, actually lets it rack up enough damage to mostly KO most Pokemon in the format. And this would specifically KO the one Pokemon that we're going to be talking about in this example, which is Grimmsnarl, right? So normally, even though these two would KO Grimmsnarl, what you can do, and this is a good use of terastallization, is now you can Terra type it into a Steel type. And when you Terra type it into a Steel type, obviously it's not going to be very effective, which means you're going to be able to live, get a Reflect Off with Grimmsnarl's Prankster ability. If you guys don't know, Prankster pretty much lets you use your support moves or like status moves. They have their priority raised by 1. I'm actually going to shrink myself a little bit just so you guys can see this a bit better. But you can use Prankster, which has their status moves, their priority increased by 1. So Reflect basically goes up, and then what you can do is then you can Parting Shot out to kind of phase yourself out and like cycle and lower the opponent Dragonite stat, right? So hopefully you guys are following at this point as well. Also too, if you're following this and you're newer to the competitive game, or you're just a viewer who's just trying to understand the competitive, definitely feel free to leave comments in the chat. I'm more than happy. I love reading the comments and answering questions when I can. So definitely feel free to do that. And also make sure to check out coaching as well, which I do have down below. Anyways, so that's going to be an example of defensive terastallization. Now, obviously there are more applications of this where pretty much, for example, we have an Amoonguss here. Let's say that we know a super effective psychic move is going into our Amoonguss. What we can do is we can utilize a Terra Steel type, right? So pretty much what you can do is you can change your Amoonguss into a defensive Terra Steel type, take the psychic move, and return with the Spore. Now, obviously, these are some really strong defensive applications with some strong defensive meta Pokemon, right? And this pretty much allows you to absorb hits better. It doesn't really focus on how you deal damage. It just focuses on you actually just being able to live things. And this is usually like defensive terastallization is something you'll usually see on like just your Pokemon, like just like your support Pokemon pretty much. So these are the two examples that we want to go through. So now offensive terastallization. So some examples of this are just Pokemon that are doing incredible amounts of damage that just want to buff their damage even more by matching their Terra type into whatever move they're clicking. So one example is Earthquake Garchomp with Life Orb and Terra type Ground. You're just going for substantial amount of damage, right? That is the focus. Or something like Chi-Yu, for example, right? Chi-Yu wants to usually run something like a Choice Scarf, and it Terra types into a Fire type, so when it actually ends up using its Fire moves, it's hitting incredibly strong next to its ability, Beads of Ruin. Now, for those of you who are still learning the competitive, Beads of Ruin lowers the opposing special defense by 25%, and the Choice Scarf gives you the speed you need to actually outspeed a lot of the faster Pokemon that would get rid of your Chi-Yu. And pretty much, the Terra type Fire buffs your damage even more, combined with all of these multipliers to pretty much make your Chi-Yu super threatening Pokemon, right? And then our final example we have is a Fluttermane, right? So Fluttermane is a really fast version of Misdreavus from the past. And pretty much what it does is it just has a lot of offense and speed. And normally what you would do is you would just pair that with something like Life Orb, right? Or you pair it with a Sash if you want to be more defensive. And you Terastallalize into a Fairy type to get really strong Dazzling Gleam damage. These basically, like, these uses of Terastallization are Terastallization uses that are purely focused around like the linear offensive route with them, right? Like, you're just focused on buffing your damage and doing more damage. And you know, this is something that is very valid. I think it's a very valid use of Terastallization. I just think sometimes people can kind of focus into it a little too much, right? Now, a couple of Pokemon do gain particularly strong kits from this. One example would be something like Gyarados, right? So Gyarados originally really struggles to like have any other coverage except for its water moves, but because of Terra Blast and Terastallizing into a flying type, it actually loses one of its quad weaknesses, and also it's able to go for increased amounts of damage than normally would be, because its best coverage beforehand was bounce, which actually it doesn't get this gen, which is really funny. But pretty much Gyarados was able to get bounce in previous gens, and that was literally the best flying coverage. Now, because you have Terra Blast, you can actually use a strong flying move on Gyarados, which is incredibly strong, super good for Gyarados, and lets it get a bunch of damage. And that combines with its stab, obviously, to get a bunch of damage. It would be another offensive use of Terastallization. So now we have counter-offensive Terastallization. So what's the difference with this, right? These are Pokemon that are going to be utilizing Terastallization in a way of like, okay, I know that these certain Pokemon threaten my team, but this specific Terastral type lets me beat them or not be as weak to them, right? So perfect example of this, and I think this is one of the strongest applications of Terastallization, is the Kingambit team that I actually ended up using to get second place in the first Scarlet Violet tournament, right? Pretty much, I took the concept of a Kingambit and I was like, okay, this Pokemon is really strong. It beats these Pokemon. Now, what can I do with it when I change types? And immediately, all the things that pressured it, or matchups that were difficult for it because the partners would pressure Kingambit in a certain way, were all alleviated because I actually had access to Terra Blast Water type. And this just shows you how creative you can really be. You can turn Pokemon into completely different types, take advantage of Terra Blast, obviously, to use that coverage. It's just incredibly strong, right? And it gives you a lot of different flexible options that you can take advantage of. And this isn't the only example I want to go over, because obviously there's more than one way you can use this. Let's look at something like Sylveon, right? Sylveon wants to change into a fire type, for example, on a key turn. And what does this do? It allows you to beat something that you couldn't normally beat while also taking a certain move. So maybe like a Scissor or Bullet punches you, right? And you change into a fire type and return with a fire type move. That is a counter-offensive Terastallization, right? And then the final one that I really want to talk about would be like any kind of Rotom form changing their type, right? So first off, we can talk about Rotom Mow, or sorry, not Rotom Mow, Rotom Wash. So Rotom Wash would just change itself into an an electric type sometimes to just like remove any weakness it has. But another example of counter-offensive Terastallization would be something like Terra Blast, with a Terra Fire type, which pairs well with its ability, right, and allows it to do more damage combined with specs, right? And now that grass weakness you had, you can turn into a fire type and Terra Blast back. That is a counter-offensive Terastallization. And this is just kind of cool because it just shows you like all the different possibilities. And obviously this idea can be fleshed out on a lot of different teams. So my biggest advisory to you guys is when you're building teams, keep this in mind and obviously utilize these concepts well on your team. I would actually recommend having a good mix between all these. So like, for example, if we look back at like my Kingambit team, I use this a lot as reference because this is like kind of the best team I have to reference at the moment. Obviously, like there's more on Patreon and stuff, but this is like the most public one, so it just makes more sense for me to reference it. Pretty much, right? I have a couple different applications of Terastallization, like I mentioned, right? Where you have the counter-offensive ones, you have the more offensive ones in general, and then you kind of have the, middle ground ones, right? And this essentially just kind of gives you an idea of like how you can apply these to your team. So I actually had a pretty good balance on this team. So I had Terra Flying Gyarados. So I got the stab on Terra Blast, right? So I got like 2 times to Gyarados' flying moves. And I had Garchomp, which just boosted its Earthquakes with Terra Ground. That was 2 Pokemon that used offensive Terastallization. Amoonguss and Grimmsnarl changed into Steel types. That was to cover their weaknesses. Defensive Terastallization. There were 2 of them, right? Finally, King Gambit and Rotom both change their types to either have no weaknesses or just beat the things that they originally lost to. King Gambit changed to a water type to beat certain fire types that it lost to. Counter offensive Terastallization. Rotom changed to an electric type to get rid of its weaknesses to stuff like opposing water types, right? And behind screens, it was too bulky and it could KO them. Counter offensive Terastallization. So you guys can see how it's kind of implemented on team. And this is like a small factor that goes into these teams that actually makes a big difference. Mostly because it allows you a little bit of flexibility in terms of the use of your Terastallization as well. It always keeps your opponent kind of guessing in terms of what you can do with your Terastallization. Hopefully this video was helpful for you guys and it was a little bit insightful into how you can implement Terastallization into your team, and gives you guys a bit more of an idea of like how it's used in the competitive. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. Make sure to let me know what you guys thought down below. Make sure to let me know what videos you guys would like to see next in the future. And yeah, I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for all the support, and see you next one.